Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis for today. Before we go deeper into the Hindu newspaper for today, an important reminder: Byjus Exam Prep IAS is now on Telegram. It's open for all of you. Do join it by scanning the QR code present here. On this Telegram channel of Byjus IAS, you will get all the latest current affairs updates from our side and all the news of new initiatives that we have been bringing for you day after day. So don't forget to join this at the earliest. Now let's begin with the first article that we have from the Hindu newspaper today, that is focusing on an important initiative taken by the Indian government and the RBI. That is, in the past few weeks, we have been trying to increase the use case of the Indian rupee. We have been trying to use more of Indian rupee as compared to the US dollar for as much trade as possible. The focus, especially in this article, is about the India Russia trade. The author, who is a professor from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, says that the Indian government has been ensuring that with Russia specifically, from whom we are buying increasing amount of crude oil and defense equipment, India is now trying to pay as much as possible in Indian rupee, and the Russians are also happy to accept that because both the nations somewhere down the line want to ensure that the monopoly of the dollar is actually curtailed. Now, as you know, dollar across the world is now seen as the only currency that is actually strengthening. The reason being that because of the increasing inflation, because of the decline in the economic activity from nations across the world, the investment is actually coming out and going into the US only. Meaning that currencies across the world, be it the Indian rupee, be it the euro, be it most currencies across the world, all of them as compared to dollar are actually depreciating. So all the nations now are looking for certain alternatives because they don't want to buy dollar time and time again. Also, because the international trade is done in US dollars only, it gives a very unfair advantage to the US. For example, while Indian government has to think twice before printing new currency, fearing of inflation, the US government doesn't have to take all those things into consideration because they know that the US dollar is the by default international currency. So nations across the world have been trying to find a way out of this. For India, a ray of hope has been seen in the India-Russia rupee trade, which is done using the Vostro accounts. Now, I'll give you an example of how Vostro account works in very simple terms. Let's try and understand this. Let's say if an Indian importer is actually importing something from the Russian government. Now, they have to pay to Russia. Rather than paying to Russia, what they will do is Russian company will actually set up an account in the Indian banks. Let's say they set up an account at State Bank of India, where all the importers from India can actually deposit money to give it to Russia. This will be called a Vostro account. So, in simple terms, a Russian bank would open up their account in an Indian bank to receive payments in Indian rupees from the Indian importers and pay it to the Indian exporters also in Indian rupees. That is called the Vostro account. So, multiple Russian banks have now opened up their own Vostro accounts in the Indian banks where they are accepting money in the Indian rupee, which is increasingly being used for the India Russia trade, which is a good sign. Now, there are many advantages of this. For example, as I said, India has been seeing a depreciating value of rupee. And rupee is not the only one. Most of the currencies across the world actually have been seeing this trend. You remember when we discussed a few days back how euro for the first time became even weaker as compared to the dollar. And there was a time when euro used to be at least 15 to 20% higher than the dollar. So even euro has lost a lot of value. Also, since India has a trade deficit with Russia, meaning that India imports more as compared to what we export to Russia. This will also be helpful because now we won't have to pay for Russian imports in dollars. That is where the Vostro rupee account comes extremely handy. Russia has extra Indian rupee in their hand now. What will they do? That is also to our advantage because when Russia has extra Indian currency in Indian rupees, most probably they will only use it to buy stuff from India. So in the coming years, we can expect more pharmaceutical products, electrical machinery, etc. going from India to Russia because they have access Indian rupee now. So it's a win-win situation for India in both the sides. However, it is obviously not as easy as it sounds. There are multiple hurdles. The first biggest hurdle is the reason why every country across the world decided to go ahead with dollar. The reason why almost every country accepts dollar is that if they actually ditch the dollar, there is no way to find out the real exchange rate between the two sides. So, for example, how much Indian rupee will be equal to the Russian ruble? There is not much clarity on that because it is not freely floating in the market. The two sides will have to come together and agree on a common price. This is what creates a lot of confusion between the two sides. When both of these currencies are freely floating against the dollar, then we don't have that kind of a problem. Second, would all the private businesses across India and Russia be willing to accept the rupee? That is also a concern. Maybe some Russian businesses say that we don't want the payment in Indian rupee, we want the Chinese yuan, or we want the US dollar, or euro, or pound. In that case, what will happen? And thirdly, there's always a growing concern from US. Yes, US has not imposed any sanctions on us so far. Yes, we have even got an exception for the S-400 missile defense deal for Russia to go ahead, but we should not stretch the limit so far. As you say in English, don't test the patience. That is, just because the US has been patient with us so far and has not imposed any sanctions on us for trading with Russia, we should not push this limit, and we should not do this because the sanctions may not be very far. Now, there is also an interesting point to note here, which the author is saying. Although there are sanctions imposed on Russia, although the European nations are not buying the Russian oil or gas also directly, but there are multiple news reports that are saying that Europe is still using the Russian oil, just that they are doing it through India now. So, as you know, as per the news stories, India is buying Russian oil at almost 30% discount as compared to the international market. This crude oil coming into India is getting refined, and then the same is being sold to European nations. So eventually Europe is using the Russian oil only, just that they are not directly taking it from Russia, but it is rerouting through India, which works in India's favor because in that case our refineries, like the biggest oil refinery in the world in Jamnagar, which is owned by Reliance, they are making a lot of money out of this. Now, if you look at the history, you will see that India ruble direct trade was actually a reality in the Soviet era. In fact, it was in 1953 that the two sides had signed an agreement called the Comprehensive Bilateral Trade and Payments Agreement. Now, that worked well for many years. We also had a lot of support from Russia that led to India building up a lot of infrastructure in the few years after our independence, such as the Bhilai steel plant and many other industrial units that were controlled by the government. However, the problem started in 1991 when Soviet Union disintegrated, when they were also going through their own financial trouble. There was not much clarity between the two sides on what will be the exchange rate. Obviously, Russia thought that their ruble is very strong, India thought otherwise, and that is what led to all this issue. As I said, similar issue can come once again in the rate of exchange, because when you don't have a free floating currency in between to decide what the rate will be, there is no clarity on the exchange rate. So we'll have to ensure that the same problem of the past does not come up once again. As I told you, the article also says this, that India, despite the US sanctions, despite the European nations telling us to do otherwise, we have been importing quite a lot of crude oil from Russia. So much so that this article tells you that our crude oil import from Russia jumped 50 times and now accounts for almost 10% of all the crude oil import from India. This is the first step. The second step is the same oil, after being refined in India, is now being taken to the European markets. So Europe indirectly is still using the Russian oil only, just that they don't want the world to know and they don't want to admit that they're still using the Russian oil. Now, if you look at how RBI and the government of India have been trying to increase the prominence of Indian rupee, they actually have multiple reasons for that. One other reason is that we have to keep a very close look on our forex reserve. If you look at our neighboring states, Sri Lanka, Pakistan have already gone to IMF. Recently, Bangladesh also requested the IMF. India obviously is in a much better situation as compared to these nations. But in the past few months, we have seen that their forex reserves have declined. mainly because there has been a lot of withdrawal of investment of FPI, FDI, etc., which is going to the American market. Also, the crude oil is becoming much costlier around the world except Russia. That is why we are also ensuring that in the future the situation does not deteriorate, and we are trying to increase the usage of Indian rupee as compared to the US dollar. As the article specifically mentions the Vostro account, I want to just clarify what exactly is this. It's not that difficult to understand. Let's assume in Russia there is a bank called XYZ. In India, we have a bank called SBI, the State Bank of India. This Russian bank opens up an account with SBI to accept payment from Indian merchants in Indian national rupee. So this account will be called a Vostro account. That is an account opened up from the Russian bank and an Indian bank to take money from Indian traders and then pay money to Indian traders also for trade. It will all be transactioning in Indian rupee. That is called the Vostro account or the special Vostro account. Indian exporters may also receive advance payments from the overseas importers through the Vostro account only. Usually, the payment or the balance in this account can be used for projects and investment, import export, investment also in the country's treasury bills, government securities, etc. So, that is the significance of the Vostro account. The next article that we have is about a recent statement by the Union Home Minister Mr. Amit Shah, who last week said that engineering, law, and medicine in India, especially at the higher education level, should be taught in vernacular Indian languages. Now, this is in line with what the National Education Policy had also suggested when it came out in 2020. The reason is very simple. 95% of children in India still receive primary education in their mother tongue. So obviously when they're opting for higher education, we cannot all of a sudden say that now we won't teach you in mother tongue, now you have to be taught in English only. So obviously we have to fill in that gap and the government is working towards that. For example, AICTE last year granted approval to 19 engineering colleges in 10 states from 6 different Indian languages. AICTE also has developed a tool called AICTE Translation Automation AI, that is Artificial Intelligence tool, that will translate English online courses into multiple Indian languages almost instantaneously. The SWAYAM portal, that is a portal where a lot of online courses are being offered, they also offer a lot of courses in Indian languages as well. Now, I'm sure there is no one who would say that teaching in Indian language is bad. Everyone would accept that this is a good idea. But if you actually realize this, you can't really go away from the practical reasons and the practical arguments against this also. For example, I can teach anyone in Hindi, I can teach anyone in Sanskrit, Bengali, Gujarati, Marathi, all that is fine. But the fact remains, would the same person, after let's say his or her degree, be able to find a job for his or her language? That is where the problem lies. At the end of the day, a big purpose of actually attaining higher education is to be job ready. So unless the government can ensure that there are jobs available for those people who had higher education in their own mother tongue, till then there is no point of forcing everyone to read in their mother tongue only. You can despise English, you can criticize English, but the fact remains that English language has now taken the form of a skill which is required for a lot of jobs. So English should not be discarded completely. The government should ensure that not just in the private sector, even in the government sector, for example, judiciary, etc., still don't allow the use of Indian languages. As you would know, in the Supreme Court, the language of the court is still English. So if you are asking the Indian students to go in higher education, read in their own mother tongue, then you have to allow equal number of opportunities also in the government also and in the job market as well. There have been multiple efforts done in the past, even in states such as Tamil Nadu, that have been extremely proud of their language. But not a lot of higher education colleges, even in the state of Tamil Nadu, would be seen in the Tamil language. And the same is the case with most of the states across the country. Only when you match the demand with supply, only then you will be able to see that more and more children also are opting for mother tongue education in their higher education. But till that point that the employability issue is resolved, we don't really see any major change happening. just by saying that we should offer local language courses. Now, there are multiple challenges associated with this. For example, as I said, it all comes down to, are you now ready for the market? Are you hired by the companies because you know the local language? If that issue is resolved, only then switch to the local language will make sense. Second, it doesn't really apply for those institutions that get admissions from all over the country. Talk about IITs, talk about IIMs, talk about the NITs, talk about AIMS, etc. All these institutions get admissions from people across the country. So they don't come from one specific state. They might have their own version of their own mother tongue. So how would you ensure that all of them get taught in the mother tongue? This would not apply to these kind of institutions. Then even the study material, most of the books that you actually refer to are very, very hard to find in regional languages. You have to convert all of them, translate them with perfect quality. Only then you can actually ensure good quality education in local tongue as well. Placement support, as I said, remains a challenge. Even the availability of faculty remains a challenge. Because as you can just imagine, the people above this generation, because they were not taught in their mother tongue, how can they become a good teacher? So obviously it goes from generation to generation. If this generation is taught good knowledge in their mother tongue, only then in the next generation some of them can become a faculty. So that obviously is passed on from one generation to the other. And the next is about the global standards. A lot of students after graduating from institutions in India are aspiring for jobs outside India. Then it becomes an even greater challenge. Would they be at par with the global standards if their education has been in their mother tongue? All these issues need to be resolved first, and only then we can think about making that significant switch from English to the regional languages, even in the higher education institutions in India. This is just a reminder, as the article also says. The National Education Policy 2020 also talks about promotion of Indian language, art, and culture. These are the recommendations that they gave. For example, every higher education institution and even every school will aim to have artists in residence to expose them to the rich treasure of their own region. Strong departments and programs will be formed in Indian languages, comparative literature, creative writing, arts, etc. But again, all of that has to be supplemented with enough career opportunities in that language. The next article that we have here focuses on a topic that has been discussed multiple times in the past few months, that is the gig workers or the contractual workers. However, the reason why I would highly advise you to read this article, and the reason why it is actually different, is that unlike the other articles that usually criticize the idea of gig workers, that criticize the idea of having contractual laborers, this article in fact is saying that contractual workers can actually be more efficient as compared to having permanent jobs at some point of time. He also gives multiple examples in this article. He says that in government, temporary jobs have become very, very widespread. And government is actually offering a lot of jobs to agencies and asking the agencies to bring in their workers. I'll give you a real example. If you go to a passport office these days, or most of the government offices, you would see that the security guard in these offices are not government workers. They are the same security guards of private security agencies. The same that you would see outside the ATMs also. The same that you would see in residential societies also in most parts of the country. So even that job, that is security of the government office, has been outsourced by the government to another kind of an agency. That is because the government does not want to have these people on their payroll. The government does not want to have the responsibility of these people, and that is why they are temporary jobs or contractual laborers that we actually see. So outsourcing has become an integral part of the government, not just in passport offices, etc. Even the sanitation workers working for the government, drivers, etc., who are working for the government, most of these are actually now contractual jobs where they are not full-time employees of the government because the government does not want to take the responsibility or the liability. Again, why would the government not want to do that? Very simple. If you are a permanent worker of the government, when you retire, there is a lot of cost for the government. The pension, etc. is involved there. On the other hand, when you're a contractual laborer, that is not involved, or that is not a cost that the government has to bear. Secondly, if you are a permanent worker with the government, you are entitled to paid leaves, you are entitled to a lot of employee benefits like maternity leave, etc. For contractual workers, all of that does not apply. And that is why the governments have been wanting to give more and more jobs to contractual laborers who are on the payroll of some other agency and not with the government, and they are not permanent employees. Now, the author here is trying to give a twist here. The author says that this is not such a bad idea to have more contractual laborers if the process is followed completely. Because even at the top jobs in the country, in the private sector also, there are many consultants that are hired just for that job, and once the job is done, then they're asked to move on. So it's not something new. If the government actually hires good contractual laborers and give them a safety of tenure, for example, the government says that your contract is valid for 2 years or 3 years, and after that, we'll see how your performance is. That can actually work for the benefit of the country. He actually gives an example of what happened in Aurangabad. So, recently in Aurangabad, the bus drivers and the conductors, etc., they went on a strike, demanding a lot of improvement of their work, salary, etc. Now, because most of them were on strike and the government buses were not able to work, instead of talking to them, what the government did was they, on a priority, actually recruited people who are retired from the army. So people who are retired from the armed forces, who have been driving buses or trucks in the armed forces, and the people who have worked in the mechanical arm of the armed forces, where they can actually take care of buses, etc. Those were hired on an urgent basis. And it was seen that their work ethics and the manner that they worked, there was a vast improvement in the quality of services that were offered by the government in Aurangabad. So this is an example. These people who were hired from the ex-armed forces background, they were not permanent workers. They were contractual workers. They were told that we are employing you for a certain period of time. If your job and your performance is good, we will extend the contract. So the same can be done in other parts of the government as well. The contractual jobs as such are not bad, but as long as they are being provided a safety of tenure, as long as they are being told what is it that you are supposed to do, and they're not hired and fired on the spot, it can be actually a good initiative from the government side. This is the point of view of the author. He is saying that we should not think that everyone is aiming for a permanent job only. Yes, there are many people who are aiming for permanent job, but not everyone is aiming for the same. Maybe some people don't want a permanent job. Maybe some people are happy with a contractual job only. For them, the government must have proper policies. The government must ensure that the gig economy or the gig workers, as they are called, are safeguarded so that in the future, if they are actually ready to work in the government sector and the other sectors, they are safeguarded. So there's a solution without even making them permanent. Now, there is a lot of data on the gig economy, on the gig workers that has come from the government side also, how the number of gig workers are increasing. Some of the examples are Ola, Uber drivers, Zomato, Swiggy delivery boys, etc. Because the people, for example, if there's a driver who is driving an Uber cab, he or she is not an employee of Uber. They don't get employee benefits from Uber. For example, they don't get paid leaves, they would not get maternity leave, etc., so on and so forth. The responsibility or the liability of these employees is not on Uber. Although some of them are being given some benefits such as medical insurance, etc., but they are still not on the payrolls of the company. These are actually gig workers that actually are employed for a gig. This is in fact good for those workers who don't want to commit for a full-time job. Maybe you don't want to commit 8 hours or 10 hours a day. Maybe you only want to give 4 or 5 hours a day. There are many people, in fact, in bigger cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, who, apart from their full-time job just to earn extra money, in the night time, work as the delivery boys for Swiggy, Zomato, etc. So it actually works better for these people who want to take up any other part-time job apart from the full-time job that they actually have. So there's a good part also and there's a bad part also about the gig workforce that is increasing in India. But the fact is, the numbers that we actually see, the pace at which the gig workers are increasing, whether you like them or not, the fact is that you cannot ignore them and there has to be proper policy for them. The next article that we have here is written by the former Secretary of Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying. Now these are very interesting articles and I'll tell you why. If you read these articles, you will find it very boring. But the fact is that these articles are the ones that actually give you a lot of data and content that you can actually write in your mains answer. We keep on saying that the mains answer that you actually write should have good content, should have examples from the government side, should have good data, the government initiatives, etc. These are the articles that give you that content. So it's common to ignore these articles because again these are boring, but the fact is that these are the articles that can actually make your mains answer better. Now, what is this article about? In simple terms, what Mr. Chaturvedi here is saying is that we have been focusing too much on human health. All our research about medicines, about vaccines, about diseases is focused on human health only. If you look at coronavirus, it most probably started from an animal and then it became a human to human virus. But our focus was only on the human aspect of it. We did not really focus on the animal aspect. Similarly, the other diseases that actually impact livestock and other animals, we have not been focusing on that, which is very, very bad because taking care of livestock can actually give a big boost to the economy. He says that in India, the livestock population is about 1.6 billion and about 28 crore farmers in India just rely on livestock. And this is also more important because with the erratic climatic conditions, you never know when the flood will be on, you never know when the drought will actually come. You can't really depend on agriculture. And that is why more and more farmers are now shifting towards livestock. And that has become a major source of revenue for them. India's dairy industry, meat industry, all of these are huge industries and gives employment to lakhs and lakhs of people. Thus, it makes sense for the government to focus on the livestock also and not just on the human beings. He also says that globally, if you see in the decade of 2000 to 2010, there were about 9,580 instances of diseases outbreaks, of which 60% were zoonotic in nature. Zoonotic means a disease that starts from an animal. Many diseases actually start from animals. You can take an example of monkeypox also that is in the news so much. Most of these start from the animals only and then they start impacting the humans. That is why it makes sense to focus our research on the animals as well. In India, because of the zoonotic diseases, there has been an annual loss of $12 billion to the economy. Thus, there is a need for the veterinary science and the human health experts to work together for the government to actually give much more money to these kind of initiatives. He says that the biggest loophole is that our research is only human centric. But then the later half of the article, after scaring all of us about the diseases, he starts to say that the government has actually taken multiple initiatives in this regard. And then he says what are the initiatives. For example, he says that the Department of Animal Husbandry and Dairying has set up something called One Health Unit in collaboration with the Gates Foundation, that is Bill Gates and the Melinda Gates Foundation. The primary focus being to be ready for the next animal pandemic. If it hits the world, we should be ready for that because we are so connected to animals right now that if we have a big pandemic on livestock, it would be very, very difficult even for the human beings to survive. Many vaccines of animals are also under development for various diseases. He says that Indian government should invest even more in the animal development and ensure that the animal health industry in India becomes a multi-billion dollar industry. It's a great opportunity for India also to actually be a world leader in this. He says that the government has established an animal husbandry infrastructure fund that is ready to actually put in money to all these research regarding diseases, diagnostics, etc. But in order to make a successful model, we have to ensure the private sector and the government sector come together along with the global organizations such as the WHO, the World Organization for Animal Health, Gavi, that is a global alliance for vaccine and immunization, Bill and Melinda Gates Organization, etc. All of them have to come together and understand the importance of keeping the animal and the livestock safe as well. Now, I'm sure all of you would have read or at least heard about the National Livestock Mission. This is a snippet taken from the account of Union Minister where he mentions the achievements of the National Livestock Mission, how much government has actually invested, how many animal insurance have been undertaken, how many livestock farmer groups have been established, so on and so forth. Apart from this, I also wanted to give you information about something that was mentioned in the article but not really defined. So I wanted to share information about Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund. Now what exactly is this? This is a fund that came up in June 2020 with a budget of 15,000 crore. This is the first major fund by the government to actually help farmer producer organizations, private dairy players, individual entrepreneurs working in this area, so on and so forth. Now, what will they do? They mainly will support private investment in dairy processing field, cattle feed infrastructure, and other related aspects. Incentives will also be given for those who are establishing plant for niche products export. Now, what's a niche product? Niche product, or the word niche, basically means that targets a certain specific audience. So a product that is targeting certain specific section of a large industry, those will be called niche products. For example, if you make a specific kind of a food for buffalo only, or if you make a specific kind of a food that will increase the production in buffalo, that will be considered as a niche product. It will support the establishment of animal feed plants also of varying capacity. This is one of the first big initiatives taken by the government with all this funding. You can also take information from this particular snippet, which again I have taken from the official government website, where the government is giving information about Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund. Again, as I said in the beginning, these are the kind of examples that fetch you better marks in the mains examination. So please don't ignore these as well. The next article that we have here is a development of the sad news that we have had a few days ago. That is the crash of the MiG-21 trainer jet of the Indian Air Force that we saw in Rajasthan. That was on last Thursday. That led to both the pilots that were on board losing their life. Now, this also begs a question that if we read about so many accidents of MiG-21, etc., the one debate is about the safety of MiG-21. That is a different debate altogether. But there is another aspect to the debate. If we are losing aircrafts also in these accidents, how many aircraft do we actually have now? Do we have enough aircrafts or not? Because the speed of these aircraft actually being lost in the accidents and the speed at which we replenish these aircraft is not the same. So obviously there has to be a mismatch. This is the article that explores this. The article says that MiG-21 became a part of Indian Air Force in 1960s, and since then there have been multiple variants. The MiG-21 Bison that got crashed in Rajasthan was not the one that was inducted in 1960, so it was not that old. It was a refurbished version that came into India even after the Kargil war. So far, there have been over 400 accidents that involved the jets that have claimed the lives of 200 pilots. Now understand, from any Air Force's point of view, losing even one pilot is very, very hard. Because number one, for training any pilot, you require a lot of resources, you require a lot of efforts being put into that. And these young pilots who are actually ready to lay down their life for the country don't deserve to die in such accidents, which is not even taking place when we are engaged in a battle. Right now, there are 4 MiG-21 squadrons in service, which consists of the Bison variant, the same variant that was actually crashed recently. Now understand this, when you say one squadron usually consists of 12 to 24 aircrafts. So when you say that there is one squadron, usually this is 12 to 24 aircrafts that we actually have. Now, as far as the Indian Air Force is concerned, the Indian Air Force has an authorized strength. That is, the official strength of the Indian Air Force that we have is of about 42 squadrons. That is the strength that we can actually have, a total of 42 squadrons. Now the question is, do we actually have 42 squadrons? Obviously not. In Indian Air Force, we have not been able to live up to the exact maximum strength that has been sanctioned to the Indian Air Force. Now let's see what exactly is the present status. The reason why we don't have as many sanctioned aircrafts as we would like to have is that the rate of the aircrafts retiring because of their age is very, very high as compared to the rate at which we induct new aircrafts. In fact, by 2027-28, the MiG-29s will also retire that were made of part of the Indian Air Force in 1980s. In the last few years, yes, the Tejas light combat aircraft has become a part of the Indian Air Force, and we now have 2 squadrons of Rafale fighter jets also. But again, the number of aircraft that are retiring from the MiG age is very, very high as compared to the number of new aircraft that we are actually inducting. In Jan 2021, that is last year only, the Indian Air Force signed a contract with HAL for 83 more of these Tejas light combat aircraft versions A1 that we will start receiving from 2024 onwards. See, the problems with these kind of things, aircraft, etc., is it's not that you place an order today and you will get it tomorrow. It's a technology that requires a lot of years to develop, and then you need a lot of years to actually make and manufacture them. So you have to wait for a long time. And that is why just putting an order and receiving delivery are two very different things, and they can be a very long time between them. One other issue that we have actually not paid focus to is about the Sukhois. The Sukhoi aircraft, as you know, have been imported from Russia. These aircrafts and all these kind of defense equipments need constant repair and spare parts. Now the problem is there are a lot of Sukhois in India that are not flying. They are just on the ground because we are still waiting spare parts from Russia. In the past few months, as you know, because of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, even the spare parts supply from Russia has not been great. So maybe once the spare parts arrive, maybe we'll have more Sukhoi 30s, and this problem of Indian Air Force not having enough planes might solve in the future, but we'll have to see because there are multiple factors involved over here. At present, these are the squadrons that we have in the Indian Air Force. The Sukhois are in most numbers, then the Jaguars, MiG-21, Mirage 2000, MiG-29, LCA is light combat aircraft, that is Tejas, then Rafale. These are the number of squadrons that we have, a total of 32 right now as compared to 42 that have been sanctioned. These are a couple of infographics that I wanted to discuss with you specifically about the new development that we see for aircrafts in India. This is about Tejas. So the light combat aircraft Tejas, that is the first version that is being used by the Indian Air Force. This is being evolved even further for second version of Tejas that will be even better. That is called Tejas Mk2. It will be manufactured by the HAL and will go into production by 2025-26. This was expected to replace the Mirage, the Jaguar, etc. that will also retire after a few years or so. This will go into production and an order of 123 aircraft to replace the MiG-21s is complete. We also have different types of aircraft that are being built and designed in India. There's also the advanced medium combat aircraft whose first flight is expected to be scheduled for 2024. This is the 5th generation fighter jet. This is mainly important because of its stealth fighter capacity. Now stealth means those aircrafts or those kind of machines that cannot be detected or are very hard to be detected by the radar. The stealth aircrafts are the ones that are now in demand even in the bigger nations such as Russia, US, etc. because these are the ones that give a better advantage to the country because the opposing side radar will not be able to capture that easily. So we are working on that as well. These are the important articles from the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. The aging condition of the Indian Air Force's fleet underlines the need to accelerate indigenous fighter jets projects in India. Comment. Second, it is time to acknowledge the positive side of contractual workers in India and use them to enhance business efficiency. Do you agree? Elaborate. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a very good day ahead.